Good morning and welcome to lecture number 8. Again, we'll go in detail for the stress strain diagram. The figure shown here is different from the figure that we have seen for the ductile material. Here, the slide shows both the ductile and the brittle material. Now, here, if you see the actual stress strain diagram which we'll get for the ductile material is different than that we have seen. Here it gives the difference between the yield point, the elastic limit and the proportional limit is very less, and how to differentiate that is very important, because we have to see that first from the figure 0 to P is called the proportional limit. The stress diagram is always a straight line. From this we deduce that the well-known relation first postulated by Robert Hooke, that is stress is directly proportional to strain within the elastic limit. Note that proportionality limit does not exceed throughout the diagram. It ends at the proportional limit. Beyond this point, we can say that is stress is no longer proportional to strain. The proportional limit is important because all the subsequent theory involving the behavior of elastic bodies is based on the stress strain proportionality. So this is our first indication that the proportional limit and not the ultimate strength is the maximum stress to which the material is subjected to. The second point is the elastic limit. Elastic limit is the stress beyond which the material will not return to its original shape when unloaded, but will retain permanent deformation, that is called the permanent set. So we have to see that elastic limit, though it is a straight line, after proportional limit there will be some permanent deformation in the material that we are going to test. The third point is the yield point. Yield point is the point at which there is an appreciable elongation or yielding of the material starts. Yielding of the material without any corresponding increase in load. Indeed, the load may actually decrease while yielding occurs. That is called the plastic deformation. What is plastic deformation? In that we say that I told you in the last lecture that plastic deformation, when once the load is released, we can say that there will be no regain of the original shape. That is called the permanent set or the yielding. However, the phenomenon of yielding is peculiar in the structural steel. This figure we can say resembles to the basic of a puddler, that is the structural steel. What is structural steel? Is nothing but the bars that we are using in construction. You might have seen the torsion bar, the twisted bars which are there are used for the bringing the constructing the slabs or the columns in that is called the particular structural steel. The other grades of the steel and alloy steel do not possess it indicated by a typical stress strain diagram. These are, we can say, just a representation of the structure. These curves are incidentally are of for first loading of the materials contains appreciable residual stresses produced by the manufacturing or the aging process. After repeated loading, these residual stresses are removed and the stress strain becomes practically straight as shown in the material testing. We will see it in the material testing lab. Now, what is yield strength? It is closely associated with the yield point. For the materials that do not have well defined yield point, the yield strength is determined by an offset method. This consists of drawing a line parallel to the initial tangent of the stress strain curve, this line being started from an arbitrary offset strain usually of 0.2%, and the intersection of this line with the stress strain curve is called the yield point. It is very difficult to determine the exact yield point when we go for the experimentation, but this is just we can say that is a theoretical representation. Now when we go for designing, we have seen always the yield strength of the material corresponds to the yield stress or the yielding point, and always it will be given in a range. I told you yesterday, I think if you remember, 380 to 420 or any range that is given in the design data handbook. Why this is in a range, and from that we are selecting a particular range or a particular value which will be from a particular table depending on the application, or we can say the corresponding testing that we are doing for a application. These are the standard values, and we have to see that this is the important point when we go for the design of the component, that always yield strength will be considered, or the yield strength of the material will be given for designing a particular component in your machine design or designing any component. Now the next point on the stress strain graph for the ductile material is the ultimate stress, and the corresponding strength is called the ultimate strength, as it is commonly called the highest point on the stress strain curve. If you see, the rupture strength is the stress at the failure of a structural steel, and it is somewhat lower than the ultimate strength because rupture strength is computed by dividing the rupture load divided by the original cross section area, which is incorrect. The error is caused by a phenomenon called the necking. As the failure occurs, the material stretches very rapidly and simultaneously narrows down the diameter of the bar, that is called the neck, at that particular point, which we have seen in the graph on the tensile testing machine or on the tensile testing machine. If the rupture area is measured at the failure after the failure and divided by the rupture load, the result is true value, which is the actual failure stress. Although it is considerably higher than the ultimate strength, it is commonly taken as the maximum stress of the material. The line in this figure, we have seen one dotted line which goes upward. That is nothing but, we can say, the rupture strength of the material. So these are the things that we have to note in case of the, particularly for the stress strain diagram for the ductile material. Now if we compare the ductile material graph with the brittle material, same on the brittle material also we can say that is, we have the strain on x-axis, stress on the y-axis. Now what are the brittle material? Last time I told you, when we go for the brittle material, we can say high carbonized steel, cast iron, aluminum and concrete. Now in this case, we have again seen, when we go for the graph, we see only a straight line and the line completely droops down. That is the failure of the component after a particular, that is called a sudden failure of the component. So what is the difference between the two graphs? We have to see. It is very important. I have explained yesterday, but again I am telling you that it is important because this is the point where we have to go for selection of the material based on the strength of the material. Why based on the strength? Because in that case, what is the maximum load that will be carried by the material will be decided on these two graphs. So in brittle material, there will be a sudden failure. In case of the ductile material, before failure there will be a deformation, or we can say there will be some indication of failure before the actual failure of the part in two parts. So that is very important when we go. Now the next important thing here is the working stress and the factor of safety. Working stress is also called the allowable stress. Is the maximum safe stress a material may carry. In design, working stress sigma W should be limited to a value not exceeding the proportional limit. However, it is difficult to determine accurately the proportional limit, so it is necessary to base the working stress on either the yield point or the ultimate strength, and we have to divide it by a number n, which is called the factor of safety. So in this case we can say the working stress sigma W is equal to sigma yp upon n yp, that is the yield point for the ductile material and n yp for that is the ductile material. Similarly, if it is a brittle material, sigma W will be equal to sigma ut upon n ut, where we can say that is sigma ut is the ultimate strength and n is the factor of safety for the ultimate strength. Now in this case, why we are considering the ultimate strength of the material in brittle material? Because there is no indication of the failure, directly the failure occurs in brittle material. That's why we are considering the ultimate strength of the material. Now we have to always make a note that the yield point is selected as the basis for determining the working stress. In structural steel, it is the stress at which a prohibitively large permanent set may occur. For other materials, the working stress is based on the ultimate strength. Many factors are to be considered in selecting the working stress. This selection should not be made by the choice. It will become an apparent, or in moment it will see that usually the working stress is set by a group of experienced engineers and embodied by various codes and specification. The factors governing the working stress starts with the observation that in many materials the proportional limit is about one half the ultimate strength. To avoid accidental overloading, or a working stress of one half the proportional limit is usually specified for dead loads that are gradually applied. The term dead load refers to the weight of the structure or the loads that once applied are not removed. The working stress in this way corresponds to a factor of safety and is recommended for materials that are known to be quite uniform and homogeneous. For materials like wood, in which unpredictable non-uniformities may occur, such as knots or the holes or some defects, larger factor of safety are desirable so that the component should not fail. The dynamic effect of the suddenly applied load also requires higher factor of safety. Factor of safety is the ratio of critical load to the safe load and is known as the factor of safety. For we can say the mild steel, it is maximum is 3, wrought iron is 3, cast iron is 5 and wood is 6. From this we say that it is the factor of safety goes on increasing as the strength of the material decreases. So these are the basic things that we have to learn when we go for, that is the basics of the selection of the material for any application. Now this slide we have seen yesterday, that is the Hooke's law, and the other is the Young's modulus of elasticity. Now let us concentrate on the stress strain diagram. The slope of the line is the ratio of stress to strain is called the modulus of elasticity, and it is denoted by capital E, or E, capital E is equal to sigma by epsilon or small e, which is written in the form sigma is equal to E into epsilon or small e. In this form, it is known as the Hooke's law. Originally, Hooke's law specified merely that the stress is proportional to strain. But Thomas Young in 1807 introduced a constant of proportionality that came to be known as Young's modulus and later to be known as modulus of elasticity. From Hooke's law, sigma is equal to capital E into epsilon. The units of modulus of elasticity are similar to that of the stress sigma, as epsilon is a dimensionless quantity. Now in Hooke's law, let us replace sigma is equal to P by A and epsilon is equal to delta L by L. From that we get P by A is equal to E into delta L by L, where delta is equal to PL upon AE, or we can say delta is equal to sigma L by E, and this expresses the total deformation delta against the applied load P, the length L, cross sectional area A, and E, the Young's modulus of elasticity. The units of deformation is same as the length, and since sigma and E are same, the restriction for above equation are known. That is, the assumptions that we have made: load must be axial, the bar must have a constant cross sectional area and must be homogeneous, and the stress must not exceed the proportional limit. So this is the basic that we have seen in case of the stresses. Now let's go to the shearing. When we say shearing forces causes a shearing deformation, we have to check what is the difference between the axial deformation and the axial shearing deformation. Now when an element subjected to tension undergoes increase in length, and an element subjected to shear stress does not change the length of the sides but undergoes deformation or change in shape of a rectangle to a parallelogram. The action may be visualized for the present as an equivalent to an infinitely small sliding of the layers each over one another. Says we can say, if you place a pack of cards and just slide it, we can see that there will be the bottom card will remain same, but the top will be, when we are pulling it, it will have a slight deformation. So that is just a representation of the sliding force that is acting on the element. The actual action is more complicated. The average shearing stress is found by dividing delta S by L. That delta S is nothing but, we can say, the deformation, and L is the length of the side that we are considering. So in that case, nu is equal to delta S by L. Since nu is very small, we can say that is nu is equal to delta S by L. More precisely, the shearing stress is defined as the angular change between two perpendicular faces of different element. The relation between the shearing stress and the shearing strain, assuming Hooke's law to apply, to shear strain is given by tau is equal to G into nu, where G is the modulus of elasticity in shear, that is nothing but the modulus of rigidity. This relation can be similarly used for finding the relation between the shearing deformation and the applied shear forces, in which is expressed by delta S, where the suffix S gives you the shearing plane, and PS L by ASG, where PS is the shearing force over the area AS and G is the, we can say, the modulus of rigidity. So these are the basic things that we have to see when we go for a particular element that we have to consider for our application. The next important thing is the same is being represented by Simon-Poisson. Usually this is applied for the biaxial and triaxial deformations. So in that case, what is biaxial and triaxial? We have seen unidirectional, when one force is actually acting, we say it is the unidirectional. If it is two directional, x and y, we say it is biaxial. And if it is on the three planes the forces are acting, we say it is a triaxial. So these are the basic things that we have to see when we go for the equation by the Poisson's ratio, which is given by Simon-Poisson, which is required for finding the particular, that is the deformation that is occurring in the element. Now when we go for the particular, that is the Poisson's ratio. What is Poisson's ratio? Simon D. Poisson showed in 1811 that the ratio of unit deformation or the strain in these directions is constant for the stresses within the proportional limit. Now what are these formulas? They are based on the experiments that we have shown. It is nothing but a biaxial tension where the reduction in transverse dimensions are known. What is axial and transverse direction? That we will see from the figure. Now in 1811, that the ratio of unit deformation or the strain in the direction is constant for stresses within the proportional. According to this ratio is named after Poisson, or it is called nu or mu, or in some books it is given by 1 by m, that is called the Poisson's ratio. Poisson's ratio mu is given by sigma y by sigma x, or for one we can say sigma epsilon x by epsilon y in x direction. If you go for y direction, it will be epsilon y by epsilon x, and we can say the sign convention in that case we will see when we go for the figure. In that case, what are the changes that are occurring in the element when we say that is the which is shown in the figure, when a lateral force and what is the. Now for a material stress elastic limit, the lateral strain by longitudinal strain is constant, and this is called the Poisson's ratio. What is epsilon lateral and epsilon longitudinal? These are explained with the figure that you are seeing in the slide. Now these are the basic concepts that we have to study when we go for the Poisson's ratio when it is applied to two directions. Now this figure shows the lateral and the longitudinal strain that is occurring in the element. We have seen when a bar is subjected to a tensile load, there is increase in length in longitudinal direction. Simultaneously, when it is increasing in length, there is a decrease in length which is shown in the figure. Now here we have to consider a rectangular section for just a simplification. It may be a bar, it may be a rectangular bar, it may be any section. Whenever a force is applied, we see that there is change in both the directions. It is not only in both directions, it may be in the three directions. If you see the perpendicular force that is acting in the z direction. So that is sigma x, epsilon x, epsilon y and epsilon z will be the three strains in three mutually perpendicular directions. But here in Poisson's ratio we are seeing that the ratio of that is the lateral strain to the longitudinal strain is given. So when we see this, we have to see for a one dimensional it is lateral strain divided by the longitudinal strain, where we can go for that is the application of the particular that is the a bar which is subjected to. Now in this case, when we go for the longitudinal stress, it is nothing but the increase in length in the axial direction. When it is increasing in axial direction, simultaneously it is decreasing in the y direction as well as the z direction. So that is decrease in diameter will be there. So that is called the lateral strain in or decrease in length or decrease in diameter of the particular or the width of the component in the figure shown is nothing but the lateral strain. One more phase, if you see perpendicular to this force, we will be seeing that there will be decrease in the z direction also. That is called the z direction. So these are the epsilon x, epsilon y and epsilon z. So these can be found separately by using that is the relation for the Poisson's ratio. Now when we go for finding the force in single direction, we say that is mu is equal to or the nu is equal to lateral by longitudinal strain. But when we go for comparing with the bilateral stresses, we have to see that the stress in y direction and z direction are also to be modified. So in that case, if you go for a biaxial force, in that case we can say it is epsilon x is equal to sigma x by E minus nu or 1 by m into sigma y by E. Similarly, if it is a triaxial stress, we can say epsilon x is equal to sigma x by E minus nu into sigma y by E minus sigma z by nu into sigma z by E. So these will be the three stresses that we are considering in x, y and z direction. So these are the basic things that we have to consider when we go for a biaxial or a triaxial stress. Similarly, when we have to see what is the effect of this, we have to see what is the further extension in a triaxial stress will be epsilon x is equal to 1 by E sigma x minus mu or 1 by m into sigma y plus sigma z. Similarly, epsilon y is equal to 1 by E into sigma y minus nu or 1 by m into sigma z plus sigma x. Similarly, epsilon z, if you go 1 by E into sigma z minus nu into sigma x plus sigma y. So these are the three mutually perpendicular strains that are occurring in the element. Now in the next lecture we will be seeing the relationship between the modulus of elasticity, modulus of rigidity and the bulk modulus. These are the three moduli of constants which are to be determined based on the Hooke's law, which are to be studied in detail when we go for that is the basic concepts of the elastic constants. So in the next class we will be seeing that what are the three elastic constants: Young's modulus or the modulus of elasticity capital E, modulus of rigidity G and the bulk modulus K. So we have to find a relation between these and see what is the effect of the stress strain acting on the element, or what is the correlationship between the stress strain and the bulk modulus, that will be seeing in the detail. Thank you.